Not all tech CEOs are known for being huge music fans, but I know one in Cupertino who is. I'm Brian Cooley with Top 5 Steve Jobs' Greatest Hits, the top money makers from his second tenure at Apple, basically the I era. Let's see which of Apple's products are most responsible for making that company just about the most valuable in the world. Number 5 is the iPod. That's right, the bottom rung of our list is where you now find Steve Jobs' critical first foray outside of computers. But it was the device that began Apple's march toward what it is today, a maker of an array of digital living products. Remember, the company dropped the word computer from its name entirely in January '07. But iPod is now Apple's only declining business, down about 6% the most recent report, and about half of those sales are iPod Touch. If you're thinking of the classic Nano, that's yesterday's Apple. Number 4 is iTunes. Now, this lowly ranking might surprise a lot of folks. iTunes for media and apps looms totally large in our digital culture, and it's one of the truly unique innovations of the Jobs I era. But its sales are, like the iPod, only around 5 or 6% of Apple's revenue. And until recently, iTunes was basically a break-even business. Now, unlike the iPod, iTunes is a growing business. And here's a hint why. iTunes sold 10 billion apps in less than half the time it took to sell that many songs. Number 3 is the Mac line. MacBooks, iMacs, and Pros. Now we're getting into real money, something like 18–20% of Apple's business, and growing at about 23% over the last year. Jobs has to be especially proud of this category because it's where Apple was always ridiculed as a niche player back in the day when it just did computers. Today, OS X has about 15% market share in the U.S. Switzerland, by the way, is the #1 Mac OS country. By the way, Apple has 91% market share of computers priced over $1,000. Nice territory. Number 2 is a device they called a toy, the iPad. It's Apple's biggest growing product by far, something like 600% growth in the last year. And it will go down in history as Jobs' last product as the boss at Apple. It's about 21% of Apple's business today, and even with dozens of competitors, it'll have over 60% of the market through 2011. When consumers are asked which tablet they're considering, 95% say iPad. I don't think the numbers are quite that high for the Playbook. Now, before I take you to the #1 hit on that album we call Steve Jobs, here's a huge hit from Apple you can't buy. Their stores. They now have over 310 of them around the globe, and they turn out the highest revenue per square foot in the entire retail chain business. Something like 7 times the dollars per square foot of a Best Buy store, and almost double what a Tiffany store does. Okay, the #1 greatest hit of the Steve Jobs second era at Apple is, of course, the iPhone. But a lot of folks don't realize by how much. It's nearly half the business at Apple. And combine that with the iPad, those two are basically the company. But with that in mind, you can see why the battle with Android is likely the one Jobs is most disappointed he won't lead the company through. Android phones now have about 41% market share compared to iPhone's 27%, and Android is growing its share some 3 times faster. But in terms of dollars, nobody makes as much money off a single phone model as Apple. So those are Steve Jobs' greatest hits. Pretty darn impressive album, right? But there's always a few flops out there. Yeah, don't miss my other related Top 5, biggest Apple flops. That's coming soon at top5.cnet.com. I'm Brian Cooley. Thanks for watching.